I guess to start us off then, Riley, like what to you defines a large battle in D&D?
I would say that this is something outside of initiative. So if you have people or compatriots outside of combat, outside of your current initiative, to me determines that it's considered a larger combat. For an example, when players come into a combat, usually initiative is rolled, and everyone involved in that initiative, is part of the combat, and there's really nothing else going on outside of that that's at least narrated. And so a large combat would be something where, in this specific instance, this is just a small snippet of what's going on in the entire, the this is a small bar fight between the players and these people, but everyone else in the bar might be, roughhousing and doing whatnot too. It's just they're not part of initiative at this time because they're not participating in what the players are doing. And so I think that's how I define it, is things
Yeah.
outside of the current initiative.
Okay. I like that. So basically you're saying like you've got your initiative list, let's say you've got your players on
Right.
there, but what defines a large battle for you is that outside of that list there's still combat happening. There's still things that are going on, actions, quote unquote, that are being taken that maybe you're not,
Correct.
taking the time off the table to lean into. That's a good it's actually a really good metric, I think, for that. Um, yeah, because I mean, the first thing that pops off to me is like, okay, you can have like small battles, medium battles, but I think you're right. Like once you hit that larger, we're talking about giant, like siege, or these huge like brawls out on a field. I think that there's no way you can manage that, unless you get your spreadsheet of 200 people and you're just like, do, 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 but your players are gonna be so bored, right? Like they're gonna be
You play
out of
D&D
it.
while everyone
Yeah,
else watches.
exactly. Like, oh, like let's watch the DM play the next, hour of
Yeah,
gameplay. Yeah, it doesn't
not
flow
fun.
very well. It doesn't flow very well. Okay, cool. Well, so then, um, let's break this up then. So we're talking about large combat, meaning we can't keep track of everybody. Okay, let's start off with there. Going off of that idea, what are some things? I mean, have you ever run much large combat in any of your games? Or like, what are some things that maybe you've looked at for inspiration, or just how do you generally like go about running a large combat game?
Yeah, I've run one in this current campaign that we're playing right now, in the Masters of the Gauntlet campaign. The very first episode, we is the first challenge we started off is a siege. You guys were under siege and had, specific tasks you had to complete within that to kind of break the siege. I've done a little bit of that. I haven't done a ton, but I feel like there's two ways to kind of run this. One is like a narration side versus like an active role play side. And what I mean is our first example where there's a bar fight and it's just between the players and the four people that looked at them sideways or whatever. For some reason, everyone else in the tavern's beating each other up too. It's just an all-out brawl. But that's being narrated. It's not like there's punches outside of their current combat that they have to worry about, dodging as like a dexterity save at the top of the round. It's just what's happening with them, and as the DM, you're just narrating what's happening around you every round. Versus like a siege, where if you're out in the battlefield, there's arrows flying, there's catapult fire, and so there's a possibility that every round everyone needs to make a dex save to see if they're hit by, a loose stone or a stray arrow, um, things of that nature. And so in my eyes, I see this, Lord of the Rings is a great inspiration in my
Mm.
eyes to this. There's a lot of big combats. Um, the Battle of Minas Tirith, for example, you take you got different players in different areas. You have the Rohirrim coming in from one side. You have Gandalf and Pippin up on the walls. You have Legolas, Gimli, and Aragorn coming in from the river with their support. And they all kind of have different objectives. Aragorn and his group is kind of taking out the Haradrim and their elephants. Whereas the Rohirrim was coming in to kind of take out all the mass of the enemies, where Gandalf was in there trying to keep the Nazgul and all the orcs inside, at bay. And all in all, they're all different objectives. And you can kind of pull inspiration from stuff like this. Another one could be like Prince of Persia. The very first, instead of being sieged, you are sieging. And they lead a little covert group up the side to the back gate while they're attacking the front gate and open the side door so that the army can kind of waltz in undetected. So there's different ways and different kind of inspirations I kind of go through.
For sure. I mean, my mind immediately went to like Helm's Deep, right? Like you've got
Yeah, that's a good one too.
huge siege that's happening. You've got the orcs. Then it's a big defense game, right? For the humans, and then you've got, the same thing that you said. You've got, the party is kind of split up and working on different objectives during the whole thing. It's constantly zooming in, zooming out, so you can see like the effects of all of these things happening as you
Yeah.
go. Yeah, Lord of the Rings, without a doubt, like probably some of the best film you could watch in prep for your games, right? Like
That is a
no
good point you bring
no
up of
doubt.
zooming in and zooming out, making sure that the players in large combat, there is a lot going on and a lot that you want to make sure that the players know is going on. But ultimately, it still is about those characters. If we constantly were zooming in at some, old man Rohirrim dude that, keeps missing his shots when the heroes are off doing their own thing, but we never get to see what they're doing. Kind of like, who's
Yeah,
this guy? Like,
exactly. Yeah,
it is about the players. So keep
right.
zooming into the players, zoom out a little bit to kind of narrate what's going on, and then back to the players.
That's good. Yeah, well, yeah. So okay, so I mean, we mentioned a couple things here that we've talked about. Um, we talked about well, kind of two different. So we're talking about like an attacking, where you're attacking, you're actually performing the siege, and then you're on the defense side. We've got like this attack, defend situation. So there's two types there. Are there some other types that you can think of large battles where these kind of mechanics still apply?
Yeah, you could also think of it at, once again, Lord of the Rings. We'll go back to the Two Towers before the Helm's Deep
Okay.
battle, when the Warg, uh, a scout party
Okay.
comes in to kind
Right.
of thin out the herd of the Rohirrim on their way to Helm's Deep. That's a big enough fight, in my opinion, that you can, there's a lot going on. Everyone's on horseback.
Yeah.
Maybe you get knocked off. Gimli gets knocked off. Aragorn's off doing his own thing. Legolas is just being cool. You know,
Just
but there's
being
a lot
him.
going on outside of that
Sure.
similarly you can zoom in to the players. They drop in the middle. They're picking off, the captain or kind of the leadership to kind of maybe lower morale,
Sure.
where everyone else is there to just kind of create an ambiance. And then
Gotcha.
occasionally there's an additional warg that maybe joins the fight, because it is a live battlefield. There's moving parts. It's not like you're just fighting the two people or whatever that are in front of you.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a good point. So three, I guess maybe three main types of combat that you could probably like really lock in and introduce onto
Yeah,
like
you're
D&D.
probably
You've got
looking at
like yeah.
siege, both
Okay, so you've got
defending
like
or
your
attacking.
attacking or defend type
Hmm.
siege.
And
Okay.
like open field.
Like an open field battle. Okay. So
Right.
then it's just kind of like an all-out brawl. Everybody's on even grounds, but all in all, within that large battle, you could still have, you know, those objectives. Let's talk about that then. Let's push in that. So how are we structuring this combat? We've touched on this a little bit. Um, I mean, we both talked about like, the players are important. We want to make sure the players are like still the stars of the show, even though there's hundreds
Right.
or even thousands of other people. Um, but how are we structuring that? So maybe walk me through how you would go about planning one of these sessions.
Objectives. I
Okay.
like objectives. It's probably the most common use of large combat is objectives. It's like you said, it's very hard to have the players come in and be like, here's 1,000 enemies, go, you
Yeah.
got to kill them all. Like, that's going to be such a boring, like, we all love combat in D&D,
Sure.
but after 4 hours of just killing minions, like,
Yeah.
I'm kind of done. I'm kind of done. Like at that point, it's just like, okay, can we just fast forward to when
Sure.
we win this? Like, so objectives, having objectives, they're obviously not going to beat the entire army,
Mm.
but if they can cut the head off the snake, take down some leadership, maybe destroy some of the siege equipment, or you take out a lot of their cavalry, and now they're on foot. You're taking away their advantages, whatever that may be. If you're being besieged, obviously it's their siege equipment and leadership. If you're sieging, taking away their defenses somehow, blowing a hole in the wall, opening the gate, also taking out leadership. Um, or open battle as well, taking out leadership, lowering them to the
Blowing
ground.
morale and stuff. Right.
Any advantage that they might have over the current situation, if you can lower that to where you're now on top, the chance of that side retreating now is higher. And so as a DM, I look at it as objectives in that area. They're kind of a covert group going through and doing certain objectives to kind of like tasks to kind of lower it. Basically,
Yeah.
you
Well,
need to get like three out
change
of
the
four.
outcome of the battle. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Say there's 4 or 5 objectives, as long as they can get at least majority, 3 or so of those 5, they'll effectively succeed.
Sure.
And, the army will retreat and try again later or, be
Whatever may
demoralized,
happen.
whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, as you were talking through that, like I was having flashbacks, my Vietnam flashbacks of Helm's Deep, let's say. I mean, that's probably an insensitive joke, but that's fine. But like, so exactly that, right? You've got like the torch bearer. He's full blown Olympian, right? He's just like running up to
Oh,
blow the wall open, right? And Legolas, you can see he fails. He fails that task that he had, that objective. He couldn't bring him down in time, right? Misses his shots. Maybe he's rolling bad today. Who knows, right? Misses, and that's a win for the orcs, right?
mm,
They blow that wall open, and that lowers the morale of like the whole the whole army inside the siege, inside of Helm's Deep and whatnot, right? And then, I mean, the whole entire time you could see like as things are happening, you've got, the orcs. You can take it from the orc side, or you can even take it from, just the other side as well. But you've got like the orcs who are running, like the turtle shell formation, pushing up to breach that gate. And then you've got the player side of it, right? You've got Aragorn and Gimli. He tosses him. Don't tell the elf though, right? Can't tell the elf. Um, but that's a whole nother objective for them. How much time can you buy, the king to be able to patch this door up or this gate up, things like that. So yeah, so it's constantly like zooming in and zooming out. And as each of those objectives happens, you can see everything shift. The king goes from, like, oh, we got this. Like, is this all you can bring? Like, bring it on. And then his wall blows up and he's just like, oh crap. Like, this isn't good anymore. And so yeah, I think that's absolutely key to large battles, is being able to create multiple objectives that will affect the outcome, or shift the battlefield, right? Make it dynamic enough to where, like, if this happens, then the orcs are at an advantage, or if this happens, then the humans are at an advantage, and all these different things. And yeah, so sorry, I got this. One other thing that came to mind is I think that there's an important piece to this whole that you might miss. There's a whole setup phase before this big battle even happens that should be definitely taken into account, right? Like, are the players prepared for this type of battle, right?
yeah.
Do they need extra allies? Should they be like going to nearby, kingdoms or towns or cities or whatever, and being like in recruiting people, right? Like, are there, and they should also be a part of like the strategy, right? So like, let's say, you know, the king is bringing in his generals, like he should include the players and let the players help decide, hey, like, let's this is how we want to run this. This is how we expect like the orcs to come in. Like, how do we want to, adjust? How do we want to maneuver troops? How do we want to do this? And let players help strategize the big game. That actually kind of makes it easier for you as a like for me at least as a DM, I think, is like to be able to like, hey, like I get, you know, I'll let the players plan this session for me, and then all
Hmm.
I got to do is like fill in a little bit of the holes, I guess. So
Yeah, no, and to your point, I played in a campaign where this was like a long 3 to 5 year campaign. I think it was closer to 5 years that we played, from level 8 to like level 19, and somewhere at like level 16, one of the backstories of the players, he had his own like kind of gang or group that he had back
yeah,
when that pulled off jobs, and while our group was off doing one thing, they sent this one player with his kind of covert group to go take care of this other objective because there were two things that they needed to do, but they didn't want to split the party. We didn't have enough people.
right.
And so we effectively kind of left our players behind, and this one player kept his character, and we all made new characters and did this like one shot on the side of the campaign that was part of the campaign, and it was a heist. Um,
That's cool.
it was
Yeah.
and we had to come up with, we were this group of dragonborn people, so we were all dragonborns.
Mm,
It was really fun, and we had to plan a siege, and we had to get people on our side. And so for a one shot, it took maybe 6 or 7 sessions. But politically, we had to talk to people, gain some allies, that we had previously, and convince them to do this. And we ended up getting some airships to go in and drop us in behind the gate, and we then kind of fought our way through backwards as they were getting pummeled from the other side of the gate, and then opened the gate for the army, and we come in, and so we ended up, yeah, kind of planning the session. He had, kind of what, this is the stronghold, how are you getting in? There was
yeah.
no real like answer to it, and we just kind of came up with our own solution, and it was really fun. It was very fun, very open. And for the DM, I mean, my guess is he didn't have a ton of prep that he had to do, except for just letting us do what we wanted to do. And it was very enjoyable. And there was a lot going on, but it was focused on us
Yeah.
and what we were doing. The little covert group, even though there was an army at the gates, an army with us, a couple other airships, there were people all over the ground. It was very
Gosh,
enjoyable, but it
that's
felt like a
awesome.
lot was going on.
Yeah, because it's like if you think about that as a DM, like you have so much, you only have so much time to like prep, and you only got so
Hmm.
much capacity to come up with things like that. But like, and as a DM, like I've watched this happen so many times. Is you know, I've watched things shift as they go, and they become better a lot of the times. Like my players
Hmm.
have ideas that change the way that I would expect an outcome to happen, or just the collective group like comes up with a better solution than I could have ever imagined, right? And so the benefit to that is that you can literally, you can delegate this prep time onto your players by having it just be a part of the game, right? To where like players come up with their solution to this future problem, and then all you've got to do is go, okay, cool, like this is how we're gonna do this. Like now I'm gonna just fill in all these little holes, and you're good to go. Like I love that. I absolutely love that. Make your players work hard. And honestly, like they're going to be much more happy, right? Like I think that like your
Oh
players will
yeah.
just be happier to know that like, oh, our plan, the one that we came up with, not just some like random NPC general. Right? Like our plan like worked. We won. We beat the siege. We fended off this huge army, whatever it may be. Um, I think that the player satisfaction is much higher when it's like they're doing, in my opinion. But
Correct. I
yeah,
agree. And D&D is a collaborative storytelling game. You are creating a story, but at the same time the players have to write their own history.
mm,
And so by letting them kind of come up with their own plans that you don't just give them and have them execute it, and you acting super surprised in the way that they come up with stuff, is very rewarding, and it makes
yeah,
them want to continue doing it. It makes them so much more engaged in the campaign now, because it's like, yeah, we did that. Like we're part of history now. Like that was dope.
exactly. Cool. Yeah. So let's see. Let's see. Let's recap real quick then. So we talked about kind of two phases so far. We've got this setup phase, is that the players are planning the attack or prepping for the battle. They're getting allies, whatever it may be. Um, you know, in your case, some one-off one-shots to help like set the scene and like get that whole thing prepped. Love it. So that's like the setup phase that we've got going on. Then we've got the actual battle phase that we've talked about, zooming in, zooming out, having objectives, right? certain objectives are going to sway the outcomes of the battle, right? So you've got, things changing. It's a very dynamic session or a couple of sessions or however long this battle is going to be. And then, what do we do after that? I guess we haven't talked about that piece. So the battle has raged on, and we're coming to maybe the climax. How do we manage the end of this large battle?
I mean, either being, and it depends, I guess, on where in your campaign this is set up. But usually these large combat scenarios with 3 or 4 objectives in them could take a couple sessions.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
so having that reach a climax of a boss or, uh, something of that nature where there's kind of like a final moment where you face off with the Witch King, or you run into kind of the main captain, and have to deal with them, and ultimately that's kind of what turns the tides and lowers the morale, and they all start to retreat. You jump on top of a Muma kill and freaking kill it, and everyone on top of it, whatever
Right.
that may be, as like the apex. If you notice in Lord of the Rings, those are the 3 moments. uh, Gothmog is killed. The really mangled guy he's chasing after,
Mm. Yeah, yeah.
um, Eowyn, and he's killed by Gimli and Aragorn. Legolas gets up and destroys a Mumakil, and then she ends up going and takes out the Witch King. And that all happens within the last little bit of the fight, where it's like, wow, this is what they took out 3 really key pieces, and now the tide has turned. And so, similar to a campaign, kind of a little mini boss in the middle of or the end of this, I think is a great way to end. It's probably a really cliche way to end, but it also makes them feel like, yeah, we got it. Maybe they don't kill the like ultimate bad guy
Mm.
because he's got to run away and continue, being a nuance to continue the campaign, but you take out a couple of his like leading men
Sure.
or women.
Or women. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no, I think that's a good point. I think that all of it should be building up to a major or either like a major turning point, right? So either one very difficult objective to accomplish. Again, Helm's Deep. Apparently, that's like all I can think of. But you know, they get pushed all the way back, and they're all stuck there. I think in like the king's quarters, and they're just like it's over. The king's done, right? He's like, I'm done with this. Like it's Theoden, right? Gotta make sure
Hmm.
I get my names right. Theoden's just
Yeah.
like, it's over, man. Like, and Aragorn's like, no, it's not. Like, let's freaking go, bro. Like, lock in. And he's like, ride out with me. And he's like, okay, And so like, it creates like this, dynamic sense. And then they go out, right? And again, this is part of the setup phase, right? Like, Gandalf was off trying to recruit some people to help out, and here comes all the Rohirrim, like riding down, and they just sweep all of these orcs out, right, and whatnot. So it's like a great ending to a very tense situation. So I think that like you're right. I think either like a big, like, you're taking out the big baddie. It doesn't have to be the like your biggest baddest guy, but maybe one of his generals or whatever, or a huge like objective to be accomplished to turn the tide, make everybody
Hmm.
retreat, things like that. But yeah, no, I think that's
We
that's a
we
good
can
point.
also go back to the Prince of Persia example as
Yeah.
well, where there was no big baddie that they ended up, the climax of
Mm.
that. They ended up with a magic item, a freaking
Oh yeah,
knife that could
true.
reverse time. Like this was a huge, and obviously there was a bunch of bad guys that were after this. Ultimately, the people that they were fighting weren't enemies. They were allies that they were just kind of persuaded to kind of attack. But anyways, you can reward that with they got, this really cool item
True.
that can now help them in their endeavors, but also could be something that enemies are now looking for too. Maybe they got the One Ring. Do they
Right.
use it? If they do, it brings enemies to them.
Sure.
So there's
No,
things
that's a
like
good
that too
point.
where you could reward them. We always talk about rewarding our players, but that's a
Absolutely.
great way of like, here's the reward, but it comes with baggage, or
Right.
maybe it doesn't.
Sure. No, that's a good point. I love that. So yeah, so again, recap. So you get your setup phase, then you get the main battle, dynamically changes as they go
Hmm.
along, and then boom, there's a climax. At some point, that battle has got to end with one side or the other taking over. And it's okay, I think, that like to even have like a battle that they lose,
Correct.
like sometimes that's just what happened. In fact, one of our campaigns, the Defenders of Gog, right?
Yep.
We had that middle point where you guys made it through. You faced off with the main baddie, and he actually ended up winning.
He wrecked us.
And kind of he yes, I was rolling hot that night. That's all I could say with those fat dice. But
Hmm.
um but yeah, so it completely shifted, and you know created a whole nother aspect of like, okay, there's now a redemption arc. Like we failed the first time, but now we can go back and we can win this next one, right? Like it's just
Well,
it created a good
and that
piece.
part was really cool too because how we failed that, I was practically killed and thrown out the tower
Mm,
window. One of our friends jumped out the window because he had wings to kind of save me from dying from the fall, and then he ended up banishing the other two party members. So we ended up having a split party, where we now had one or two sessions where we kind of had to find our way back to each other, regroup. It was very realistic. It was very realistic. We got totally disbanded because we failed, got and we had to regroup and figure out a way to, and we ended up coming back and with a better plan, and it was really cool.
yeah, it was really good. It was like back to the drawing board. You guys came up with a better
Hmm.
plan. You recruited some more people. You accomplished a lot more, and then you came with a stronger hand to the table, and it
Hmm.
was it was really good. It was really really good. I
Yeah,
was
back to Lord of the Rings,
crazy
Battle of
impressed.
Amon Hen, man, where
Yeah,
Merry and Pippin were taken by the Uruk-hai. There was a big fight. The party was split. They were doing stuff. They didn't, I mean, they lost, but they didn't die
sure,
because they had one objective to capture the two hobbits.
right.
They grabbed them and left, leaving the party to kind of regroup and chase them down.
Yeah, no,
And
that's
so these
wonderful.
can all be,
Again, Lord of the Rings. That's your
there's
film. If you watch Lord of the
so
Rings
many
over and over
examples.
and over again, you'll be an amazing DM, I guess, right? Like that's just, I guess that's how,
Yeah,
that's what I got. That's all I do. So,
that's where
but
I grab a lot of
okay.
my
So then,
inspiration.
all right. So we've talked about the main stuff. Now, final thing, I guess that I want to pick your brain on is, are there any like add-ons? Okay, so this is like maybe some nice to have, some things that you can sprinkle in on top of just the main three like points that we've touched on. Are there any of these add-ons? I'll give you an example. For example, like you know, encouraging some like sub games, or how do I put this? Mini games in a sense, like in type. So again, Helm's Deep, right? You've got Gimli and Legolas counting kills against each other, right? Now, I mean, obviously, you kind of have to lean more on your players for that kind of a piece
Hmm.
of like, this playful role play that they're going, uh, they're kind of tossing back and forth at each other. But it creates a very like comedic but fun dynamic to it all, right? That like
Hmm.
really, um, like as a DM, like you can play a lot off of that as well. So I don't know. Are there any other add-ons you can think of that you can kind of sprinkle things in, um,
Um,
to make it
the only
work?
thing I can think of, what I did in our recent boat race session for our current campaign, was, so the objective was, it's like, okay, you're going to start here, you're going to end here. The objective is to get from A to B. Okay, everyone else is in their boats. You can buy cannons, you can get cannonballs, you can get, different shots to affect players and people. And but then I added a cool side quest of, okay, well, if you can reach the other side without actually damaging any other team's ships, you get X reward
Mm,
on top of that, which you guys took and ran with. And I think it added a level of difficulty because you're like, ah, man, now we got to like find different ways to like affect them so that we don't hurt them, but still slow them down. And um, I think you guys enjoyed that aspect because it wasn't just, okay, let's just kill the nearest ship
yeah,
and move on. It was actually a race. It was like, okay, can I stick my leg out and trip the person kind of a thing? What can I do to stumble them but not hurt them? Um, with the whole counting example that you brought up, I definitely feel like that's not something that I would actually. I mean, that's definitely a role play of the players,
Sure. Yeah.
and I I love it when my players come up with their own, I guess, little mini games to make things fun like that and then interact with each other during the battles, keeping a kill count, like neener, 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 the barbarian versus the paladin, like who's
Right.
stronger kind of a thing. I think it's a
Right.
kind of a funny example because, and as well in our campaign, the rogue has gauntlets of ogre power. You're a really strong barbarian. The
Hmm.
druid somehow has a decent strength, and when he's wild shaped, obviously has the strength of whatever he's wild shaped into. So you all have very high strength, but you in particular are like, no, I'm the strong
Yeah, I
one,
am the strong guy.
and I, and
Like,
I'm
there's
gonna
no
prove
question.
it.
There's no question
Yeah,
about this.
even though everyone's stats are pretty much the same in the strength department, you
No.
have to prove it in game, no matter what we're doing, and it's wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah,
It's a great
it's
little
always
game,
just a
but
giant pissing contest, right? That's just
yeah.
how it is. Yeah.
But that's not something that me as a DM I came up with. That
Sure.
was a little mini game that you guys did. And
Yeah.
so if the players can do that, that will also add wonderful depth to your combats and these large scale assaults because they're into your game.
Hmm. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Um, yeah, I think let's see. One thing that maybe comes to mind, and I think you mentioned this earlier, as far as add-ons go, would be like, between objectives, have like ability checks or things happening, right? So maybe they've got to cross like this open field that's heavily defended by archers, and they've got to make dex saves to get through that to their next objective to go, give support to this other squad or whatever it may be. Um, they've got to make those successful ability checks, or they're going to take some damage, or have a setback, or whatever it may be. Um, just different things like that, like sprinkling those ability checks, right? Like another one to think of, not the, and this is again, this leans more on the player side, but you got like Legolas skateboarding down
Hmm.
the stairs, right? Like full blown acrobatics check. Um, but like, uh, and again, that kind of like that's a little more like on your players and things like that. But I think that like you could probably use NPCs as well to, you know, I would probably like use some NPCs to like, I don't know, take jabs at players, or like kind of like encourage some of that type of role play, still make it kind of fun, in a sense, to like where you can have some of those, mini games going on, like
Yeah.
last
The
time. So,
elf, Haldir in the Helm's Deep battle, he was up there. He's a good friend of Aragorn's, and
right,
he's doing work to the orcs up on top. But as they're retreating, he ends up, as he's trying to help people out, he ends up getting killed, which adds more of an emotional grab for the
sure,
players if it is like a good friend or an NPC that they've loved. Um, to kind of go through that with them as well, kind of engages them, kind of gives them an anger to continue pushing
sure,
forward and really find a way to beat and win this fight, even though it seems like the odds are against them.
yeah. No, that's a really good point too. The storytelling aspect, like definitely a lot of good points that you could put in there. Another random add-on I would even say would be like, you got to have your epic speech, right, to hype
Yeah.
everybody up. So plan
Oh
a
yeah.
speech, that's I always loved planning like the speeches. I did one for Defenders of the God. But to your point as well on that storytelling and like the emotional aspect, like that happened to you guys, like Titus in the Defenders
Hmm.
of God. That's partially the reason that, you know, um, that you guys lost that first time was Titus got killed. He got offed.
Correct.
Like, surprising to
Yeah,
me, I didn't mean to roll what I rolled, but boom, it did
that's
what it
how it
did,
happens.
and sometimes dice choose your NPC's fate, but that is how it works. So
I guess one last
yeah,
point with that of what you're saying with kind of the morale boost is in these large scale, because there's a lot of moving pieces, and if you decide to, have like the area of effect, top of
yeah,
the round, arrows coming down, your players will kind of run through resources and health kind of quickly.
sure,
It's not just a single combat, it's like 4 or 5 combats in a row. So don't be afraid to give them boosts. Make that morale speech at the beginning. Maybe make it an inspiring leader speech. They all get temporary HP, or they get a great feast or meal before the siege. and it's a hero's feast type
Sure.
benefit where they get bonus HP or saving throws because their morale's super high. Things of that nature. Don't be afraid to boost the party up before this because it can be a slog and it can be very draining on them. And to make sure that they have the best time possible at winning and being heroes, make sure to as well kind of boost them up before this kind of
Yeah.
begins and even during.
I think you can do that in a pretty good way too, to where it's not like again, Helm's Deep comes to mind. You've got like the stuff in the back, right? You've got like
Hmm.
the women, the children. You've got other stuff happening in the back, and there's a couple of scenes that they're not right there on the front of battle anymore. They're in the back, like discussing something. But you could like have something similar to that, where if they go back, they can heal up. They've got potions, they got stuff. Maybe stuff that they can't like just take on the battlefield with them, but like hey, I need to go back and heal up or repair or whatever,
Hmm.
like, and they have to sacrifice maybe a couple rounds of their combat to get back in, heal up, and then come back out. Like that's a trade off the player is going to have to make, right, and decide.
Right.
But maybe something that could like help maintain those resources and stuff throughout the larger battle. No,
I
that's
like
that's a
that.
great point. It's a really good point. So, all right. I mean, I think unless we just want to like walk through the entire Lord of the Rings, like
Let's watch them
uh
right now.
like
All
let
12 and a
we'll
half
just
hours.
we'll just we'll
It'll be
just
great.
marathon if we
Inspiration.
just unless we want to do that, like I think I got everything out that I want to
Yeah,
talk
I don't
about
think
for
I don't think
large
there's any
battles.
really much more. There is a lot of moving pieces. You can lower how many moving pieces there are.
Sure.
Um, but all in all, make it feel like the area around them, the immediate area around them is alive. Things are happening outside of their immediate combat is
Yeah.
the main purpose to this. Make sure it feels dynamic. It's not just their combat, it's everyone else's combat, and people are affected outside. Um, that troll that's maybe over there that you're trying to get to, he's also fighting stuff. Maybe he gets hit by a catapult before.
Sure.
It's living. Things happen. Move forward with it. It'll
Dynamic.
be
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah, that's probably the toughest part about it all is like you can't predict what's going to happen, but you can, you know, just try to roll with it, I guess,
Hmm.
as it happens. So,
Correct.
um, awesome. Well, sounds good. We'll put a pin in it there, and we'll chat with you. I'll chat with you another time.
Sounds good. Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the Rings.